Rawr!
When did we all get this dumb?
Almost only counts in horseshoes, hand grenades, and nuclear warfare. I don't see any bodies, so it doesn't count.
I'm angry about tax.
I'm the chef. I want to hear one thing. Yes, chef.
Come on, man. Use your brain.
The Why I'm Angry podcast starts now.
Okay, it's the Why I'm Angry podcast. We are back. It is Thursday, and we're just, getting into some of the things that have been happening around the world with the UN. We're going to talk with Maugs here. We are here in the Freestyle Man Cave studio. Make sure that you're getting on and supporting our podcast by getting some merch at the new merch store. Get on our website. We've got some new ways that you can help us out and support us. We're closing in on that 50th episode, and we're just going to celebrate here shortly. And Moggs, you're here. You're back.
Okay, yes, good to see you again. Glad
All
to
right.
hear things are going well for you. Good to check
Been
in.
been a little while. I think the last one we were in July. We had the issue with Honest Abe, and we've done a little podcast with him
Sure. Yeah.
recently, and that's on our website. So get on and check that out to find out what's going on with him. But yeah, we're going to talk about the UN. And this is one of the things that I talked about a couple podcasts back or a couple episodes back, weeks back, that when the UN takes over a country like Haiti, as the police force, you think, okay, they're just going to come in, do some security stuff, but where does that lead to? No country has ever called the UN to come in and just police, just be the regular police because they've had too much gang violence and crime. And so I thought it would be good if we figure out what the UN is. So Moggs, I know I put you on the research assignment to kind of figure out, to
Sure.
kind of
Yep.
do some of that.
Sure.
So
Yep.
what is the UN, and
Okay.
what's the purpose?
Well, the UN started in 1945, right after World War II. And as you probably know, the idea was for a bunch of countries to get together and try to establish world peace. And I think their charter, it talks about three different things. They wanted to uh, have a collaborative effort where countries would get together and develop ways of preventing war. It also talks about then the capacity for it to reach out across international borders and maintain health and welfare for people. And then the third, and more recently, they talk about climate change. So their uh, initial efforts were very wide and kind of general in terms. And certainly the idea is good. It's done. Actually, the United Nations has done a lot of good things with um, helping maintain peace, or at least minimize war in Africa. They're very active in Africa in terms of uh, prevention of genocides. They've helped a lot with global pandemics. And they do a lot of catastrophic work when there's catastrophes hit with hurricanes and tornadoes and tsunamis. So I think their intent has always been good, and they've done a lot of good things. But it's kind of like the old adage that there's a place where some people get too big for their britches, and what happens is they start to reach into uh, other aspects of society and nations in a way that may not be quite beneficial in the long run. The other big thing to keep in mind is the United Nations was developed only as an advisory role. It had no legal or authority to tell nations what to do. It was primarily or to control nations or to manipulate nations. And that's what we're starting to see a little bit of now is its fingers in national events and circumstances and in ways that can be quite worrisome in the long run. So uh, from a shift towards a purely advisory role now to the WHO, particularly now as a global healthcare guru, is what they would make themselves out to be. It's become an issue of what their ultimate role is going to be. So, in terms of its content and its makeup, its structure, it's really got six major components to it. There's the what they call the Economic and Social Council. There's United Nations General Assembly. There's the Secretariat. There's the United Nations Internal Court of Justice. And there's United Nations Security Council, as you know, as the permanent members. And then there's United States Trusteeship Council. Those are kind of the six main structures of United Nations. Now, under those, they have a lot of agencies. There are 15 different agencies. And this is where I want you to think about these agencies. It's kind of interesting that as I read through these, its fingers reach into the areas of banking, finance, healthcare, and social issues in nations' lives. It even goes into the educational aspect of nations' lives. So here's some of the more important ones, and think about this in terms of national, or I'm sure global economy. First of all, there's the World Bank. There's the World Health Organization, or WHO, you're familiar with. There's International Monetary Fund, IMF, that regulates loans to countries and nations. There's United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. There's there's United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and then there's telecommunications. There's United Nations International Telecommunications Union. So it's got links, at least, to telecommunications, education and culture, finance, and healthcare. So in this umbrella, we've got the makeups of a huge organization that can affect a lot of different countries if it's allowed to make that transition from advisory role to one of an authority. And that's where the WHO comes in, is the WHO now wants to be the authority of healthcare over the globe. And keep in mind that the mindset of United Nations is one of a global picture. They are not particularly interested in one specific nation's well-being. They're interested in an egalitarian role where there's a leveling out of wealth, and you can see that in that the favoritism that's shown to specific countries and the bias against countries that have means. Their whole role, my sense is at least, is to level out the playing field. They have a global egalitarian perspective, and in order to accomplish those goals, they need to be able to manage and manipulate countries. Now, how do we go about doing that? Well, uh, there's part of the problem that we have now is that it's wanting to become involved in controlling how countries do their own sovereign um, activities. For example, healthcare probably is the most recent one with COVID. Um, when COVID first came out, uh, what was the big authority? Well, WHO came out right away and said, well, this or that or the other thing, and half of it was true, half of it was falsity. But they were regarded as the global uh, centerpiece for information regarding COVID. Yet they did not investigate China right away. It wasn't until months and I think a year or so later that they finally got into China, and they were prevented from actually going into the lab where the virus allegedly spread from. So they really didn't accomplish anything when it came to that. But yet they felt that they had the authority to to do that and the authority to tell people how they should handle COVID. So that's just one example of how their reach now is trying to become more, how do you say it, more invasive, more, I guess, invasive
More
and
widespread,
pervasive.
yeah, invasive,
Yeah.
yeah.
So do you have a sense of that at all, Aaron, or not?
Yeah, I mean, I was just kinda jotting down some notes as you were talking that, you know, I talk about setting a precedent all the time about, that this is the beginning of a slippery slope, and maybe the first thing we did on that beginning of the slippery slope is to, give a certain group some power to overreach on something or overlook, see the bigger picture. And at that time, those people that we give the power are in it for the best in your best interest. But
Yeah.
we've gone the UN, like you said, was created to be a coming together of nations where you could, air your grievances about another country, and you could get some arbitration before you go to war with that country or whatever with the council of other countries. We're just kind of a big organization, so the network, kind of like if you joined a business group that in your field, if you joined a doctor's group, or if you know and you could share your like-minded ideas and stuff like that. And then we had war. A war came out, and so the UN, trying to keep peace, everybody donated so many soldiers to the UN. And then the UN doled out those soldiers to the places that they needed. And so now the UN has a security force.
Yeah.
And then the UN says, well, we've got a security force. So now we need, now we can, we'll get some people that are knowledgeable in healthcare or in um science, or or education, or whatever that the world needs. And we'll try to advise on that instead of bringing those people from their countries. Now the UN is kind of working on their own as their own entity. And yes, we still come together, and we speak at the UN summit, but the UN itself has enough body to it nowadays that, yeah, like you said, it's starting to kind of rule itself, and it's starting to, like you said, put its hands in other people's business.
Yeah.
And
I think
so,
yeah, I ask myself sometimes, I mean, is it wrong to be wary of these large global organizations like the United Nations or the World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, the European Union? Is it wrong to be wary of these large organizations or have a little caution? And the reason I think that people are a little wary is that uh, some of these are very quickly politicized. These very quickly become political megaphones for narratives. And the other thing is, there's no real safeguards. There's no uh, accountability to them. So if they want to do something that it by fiat and declare, well, this is going to be what it is, they're not bound by election like we are in the United States, a democratic nation, they can do whatever they darn well want to do because they don't have to be accountable to
Right.
a nation or the nation's population or populace. So I think it stands to reason that these large global organizations need to be looked at with a large degree of scrutiny because uh, they can go off rail pretty easily and not be accountable to anybody and not have any way of safeguarding them from doing that. The other big thing is when you think about that is that you know there's a tendency for legacy media to say, oh, that's just a conspiracy theorist, you're a conspiracy theorist, yada yada yada, whenever you
Right.
question something that is maybe beyond its bounds or beyond what the legacy media feels is right and proper. But I think the difference is kind of a difference of philosophical basis. There's people who kind of live by principle, and when they go into something, they try to examine it, analyze it, reflect on it, sometimes even test what works and what doesn't work, and think of what it might result in both the short term and the long term before a decision is made. So they follow more of a prescriptive way of making decisions. But on the flip side, there are those who are more reactionary. They let anything in the world happen, whatever they want to. And then after the fact, they say, oh, this isn't working so well. Well, it's too late to do anything about it. It's established and we've got to go with it. And we end up with circumstances, and you can name thousands of circumstances that happen in our country's government and other countries where an idea has gotten unleashed without any safeguards or serious thought for what the ultimate consequences would be. And obviously, the most current one is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence now is used by big tech. We use it all the time, but are there any safeguards established? No. Is there any organization that has control over it? No. Our uh, Senate and Congress are having debates over it, but nothing's been done. So it's going to be after the fact when things start to go sour that people are going to look backwards and say, gee, why didn't we do something beforehand? Well, that's the reactionary approach to issues. Now, you take all that and you put it into a sense of skepticism or caution around big uh, global institutions. That's why a lot of people have that skepticism. They don't want to wait until the horse is out of the barn. They want to think ahead and try to prevent things from happening. So that's why I think people need to understand that the skepticism or the caution or the worry about these big global uh, institutions gaining power or authority it's important to do that. It's important people understand. And we can get into some specifics, and we'll do that in a moment. But do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, and if you look at it I mean, look at the founding fathers of our country. It's only been a couple hundred years, and they were coming out of a battle with a country
You're
that
right.
was
Yes,
colonizing all over the
you're right.
world, and we were part of that colonization, and we were getting taxed because we weren't and because we weren't right there in that, ready to fight, ready to get into arguments with them and have, there was no representation for us,
Yes, right.
and we were being taxed to high heaven. And I feel like, you know, the farther we go up the chain, the less and less the government cares as much about you as much about the dollar signs that are coming out of you. And so, you know, there are certain things, and this is kind of what I just wrote down, is there are certain things that a government provides for you. or are supposed to provide for you. So they're supposed to be to give you the opportunity to get to have your needs met.
Yes.
However they do that is however they do that. So a country like the US, when we first started out as the United States, as a free nation, we provided a sense of security.
Right.
We had a security force. And so you start checking off the boxes. UN security force. Check. And then they provided us a monetary system, some kind of system to be able to trade between its citizens, right?
Yes. Right.
Now the UN has a financial arm to it, the international
Monetary fund,
monetary fund, yeah. And
World Bank.
so we check that box off. And
Mhm.
then and now that we're in modern times, we have um the infrastructure. We have energy, we have, you know, roads and things like that. So they now are dealing with energy and the environment and the new green deal or new whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And so we've got that. And now some people think, oh, well, healthcare is nice to have too. And so now they have healthcare. The the UN is a government in all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
There, I
You're
mean,
right. You're
if
right.
you want to follow if you want to follow it, it may not govern all of the countries, but it has the power to govern all countries at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. It
So
very easily
it,
could. Yeah.
if we're not looking at it with some skepticism, then we're not looking at it. That's just we're not, if you're a person in the world and you don't see that, there are some forces for good and some forces for bad, and there are some forces that are almost getting to the point of too big to you know, to be rulable.
Right. Yeah.
This could be one of them. I mean, if you were worried about the US, this is on a scale that's, 120
Right.
times the US because of the 100 and some nations that are part of it.
Yeah. You're right. You raised two really good points that I want to just go back to a little bit. And the first point you raised, I thought was really good, and it going back to the founding fathers. One of the biggest arguments between the colonialists, or the patriots, was how big the government should be. There were the
Right.
Federalists and there were Anti-Federalists, and the Federalists believed in a large, overriding federal government, and the Anti-Federalists argued that they were worried about the too much power being concentrated. They just come, like you said, they've just come from England because King George III or whoever was too powerful. They didn't have freedoms. So they just coming out from underneath a high authoritarian government were very skeptical of having a large, powerful, overriding government. And that's why they fought and fought to establish the Bill of Rights. The Constitution was established first, but the Anti Federalists said, we want more individual rights. And that's when the subsequent Bill of Rights were fought. So that goes way back to our very foundation, is that decision, that discernment. How big do we allow the federal government to become before it is it begins to act independent of the individual people's desires? Remember, Abraham Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address said, he wants a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's been a premise rich in our tradition, that it is the people's country. It's the people's government. It's not a top-down authoritarian government. It's a bottoms-up government that our representatives should represent us. So, the other issue that I thought was really good you raised is that of the distance between an individual person, and not only our federal government, but you add another layer of complexity to things in a global scale. How is an individual person or a group of person going to have any bearing on what the United Nations does? The further removed you get from a person or individual person or group, the more layers you build, the more bureaucracy you build. There's no way in God's blue heaven you're going to have any effect on what the elitists of a large global population are going to do. So you lose all sense of control or safeguards or safety when you get large organizations making decisions independent of what their populace desires. So that
Right.
extra layer I thought was really a good point you brought up, because the further removed organizations are from uh, individual people, the less control and less accountability they have.
Well, and that's one thing actually, I mean, just to, like, really, hammer that point home is in my little town, we are actually dealing with a major issue with the school board. We have 2 or 3 members on the school board that are just that fight against each other, and that are just abstinent about doing anything. Like, the fighting just does nothing. And
Uh-huh.
at this level, once that's done, you can just basically say, "Okay, well, we'll vote you out next year." And so, or every 2 years, whatever their actual, term is. And that's quick and easy. And so the farther you go up that chain, the less you know about those people, the less they know about you,
Exactly
the
right.
more
That's
people
really
it
true.
takes to get
Yes.
together. And so at the state level, we had a special election um, for an amendment to our Constitution that would create a supermajority. To change the
Oh.
Constitution, you need the supermajority, the 60% of
Okay.
votes. And so, and I had people on both sides from all walks of life. They're like, "Well, but the abortion rights people are gonna come in and change the law. They can get the money to." And I said, and so we gotta get to the supermajority because it's harder to get to that. They said, "But I don't want the government to be hard to change. I want it to be that point where, like, if we make a bad decision, let's run that bad decision back. I don't want it to be 50 years on Roe versus Wade."
Yeah.
You know? It took
Yeah.
50 years to run
Yeah.
a bad decision back.
Right.
And so on this, if the state makes a terrible decision and we do end up voting for this issue 1 that's coming up that gives, women the right to abortions in the state of Ohio, and allows, and it takes away a lot of the parental rights for, transitioning kids and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
then I want it to be as easy as they took to get it there, as easy to roll it back.
Yeah. That's
So
really, yeah.
So
That,
I was kind of a lot of people were like, "Oh, but this way it's," and I said, "No, no, let's keep the government movable." It's been 175 years, I think, with the state of Ohio. It's worked for us for this long. Let's keep it movable. Let's keep things going.
yeah.
So,
That's and that your point is really should be emphasized, because once laws are made anymore, it's hard to change them. So your point is we need to keep the government flexible enough that they respond to the people's wishes. And with that's
right.
we yeah, and we've forgotten that.
And honestly, going up the level, the government used to be accessible.
Yeah.
Some dude from Ohio got on a train, rode around the country on a train, and every stop he did, he made a speech and he got elected president.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And he was and it wasn't that he just, he was the nationally known he was the least known person. Grover
Right.
Cleveland wasn't known by anybody,
Yeah.
but he went on this, I think it was 82 stop train tour,
Wow.
and every town they stopped at, he made a 5 to 15-minute speech, jumped back on the train